Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark.
Stories to Chill the Blood, Volume 2, Story Number 1. I was at my grandparents' house one night. My grandmother then came into my room at 3:30 in the morning and told me, "Your grandfather needs your help. Get up." This sort of startled me because she had never done anything like this. I went out to where my grandfather was, right outside the door that goes out into the garage, and he tells me that the garage door just went up and down 6 or 7 times. We need to check it out. I obviously said all right, and we went into the garage, only to find the pull string that prevents the door from opening, which can only be pulled from the inside, was pulled. He looked at me and said, "You have to go outside to fix it, so no one can get in." We then headed outside, and when we rounded the corner to look at the garage, the motion lights came on, and there seemed to be scratches on the door. He and I fixed the door and went back to bed. About 2 weeks after this, I was staying there again and woke up around 2:30 in the morning to hear stomping in the kitchen, which is very close to my room. I got up, heard the stomps come closer to my bed, and then stop right outside my door. I figured that my grandfather was adjusting the thermostat. I opened the door to see what was going on, only to find that everyone in the house was asleep and all the lights were turned off. Needless to say, I didn't sleep well that night. A few weeks passed, and I went over there on a weekend because I had nothing better to do. Since it was a weekend, I stayed up rather late and fell asleep, watching TV on my bed with my door open. It was about 1:30 in the morning, and for whatever reason, I woke up without any reason. I looked around and realized that I had fallen asleep with the TV on. I looked at my door, and at that instant, I saw a man-sized figure step out of my doorway and walk down the hall towards the kitchen. I slammed my door and stayed up all night. By this time, I was pretty convinced I had a demon or ghost or something in my grandparents' house. I was just relieved that whatever was in their house wasn't following me. Maybe a month after that last incident happened, I was at my dad's house, and I was about to go to sleep. At my dad's, I'm on the other side of the house from everyone. It was maybe 10:30 at night, and I was about to go to sleep. I had laid down, turned on my TV, and then just decided to turn it off and was drifting off to sleep. Then outside of my door, I heard a combination of stomping and a really low sound. This honestly scared the hell out of me. I, in all of my infinite wisdom, decided to see what it was. When I opened my door, I saw the same thing that I saw at my grandparents' house. I teared up from fear and left the light on and fitfully tried to sleep. It didn't work well. Maybe a month and a half had passed after that last incident. I was at a friend's house, and he and I cleaned out his shed so we could just hang out in there and smoke his hookah. He usually has a lot of people over to his house, but this night it was just him and I. We were smoking hookah and we're almost finished. We're just listening to some music, and I was just sitting there listening when all of a sudden a black flash started underneath my legs, but I didn't feel anything. I started to look around to see if one of his cats came in with us. As I started to look around, I realized there is no cat in the shed. I started to become afraid on the inside, but tried to keep myself outwardly calm. I looked up at my friend, who had this look of panic on his face, and all he said to me is, "I think something just ran underneath your legs." At this point, I started freaking out because I didn't say anything about it. He told me that he saw it as well. We both ran out of the shed and went into his house and just watched TV until we calmed down and went to sleep. This was the last time anything like this happened, and I'm hoping that it stays that way. Next story. This isn't something that happened to me, but rather something that happened to my father. My father grew up in a haunted house. The floors would creak and no one would be there. Doors would close by themselves when there were no drafts, and weirdest of all, my father's sister, my aunt, was strongly plagued with nightmares that started when they moved into the house. She was only about 5 at the time. She would start screaming in her sleep and had trouble waking up whenever she was having one of her screaming fits. Her parents would try to wake her up all of the time with ill success. When she would finally wake up, she would start crying and saying the man was getting closer to my bed again. She would describe the man as only having half of a face because part of his head was missing. My father's mother was obviously disturbed by this, as her child was only 5 at the time, and it's like she could have gotten these images from any sort of media, as this was long ago. Fast forward to a few months later. The nightmares are getting worse. At this point, her parents have even tried therapy, which results in no change whatsoever. They're getting desperate at this point. A little time later, her mother's vacuuming her room, and she hears that noise that vacuum cleaners make when larger objects get sucked up. She decided to open the vacuum cleaner bag and see what the object was. Turns out the vacuum cleaner sucked up human teeth. A few calls later, it's discovered that the previous owner of their house had shot himself in that very room. I guess they weren't thorough with the cleaning. Needless to say, they moved out as quickly as they could after that. My aunt never had nightmares to that extent again. Next story. When I was about 10, I went on summer vacation to the Black Sea with my mom. I couldn't swim back then and never learned after what happened. I was there on the first day and we went out for a swim. My mom got me those inflatable things you put on your arms. The plan was to enjoy the day and I was excited to learn how to swim. The weather wasn't too great, but the water felt okay. It all changed very fast. We got pulled away from the shore by a rip current and the sea was about to storm. The waves got higher and no matter how hard we tried to get back on sand, the sea only pulled us further and further away and to the side. And on the side was a concrete wave breaker. My mom started getting physically tired and I could see sparks of panic in her eyes. We held to the concrete and there was no way to get away from the water and on top of the pier. The waves were getting stronger and stronger. All the people from the beach disappeared. We shouted help, but even if somebody was nearby, they wouldn't hear us. The waves were very loud, smashing against concrete underneath the pier just a couple of feet away. Suddenly a lady appeared in the water next to us. We had no idea where she came from. She told us there was a ladder on the other side of the pier, and while we were doing our best to hold onto the metal on the side of the pier, she disappeared. Again, we didn't see where she went. The waves were at its hardest, and the only way for us to survive was to swim underneath the pier where the waves were hitting the concrete. We had just one chance at it. We patiently waited for a few second window between the waves, swam under the pier to the other side, and found the ladder. Up to this day, we don't know who the woman was, but she saved our lives. And that day I decided that I was going to make sure my life was worth saving. Next story. This happened quite some time ago. I was 13 or 14. My father was a bartender at a local steakhouse, and I often spent time after school with him at work. One night, after closing, my dad went to put some things into the large walk-in freezer. When he tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. The lever was free and unlocked, but the door wouldn't move. He called me over to try and help. This freezer had a one-way door on it and would only open inwards. So with both of our body weights, we were eventually able to push it open forcefully. And when we did, we discovered what was inside. The freezer contents, shelves and all, were pushed up against the door, keeping it from opening. We tried to explain this by saying it was an earthquake or the shelves had just fallen, but the way they were stacked flush against the door made those impossible. It was as if someone purposely blocked the door, but if so, they would not have been able to exit the freezer. My father and I rarely speak of this to each other, let alone to anyone else. To this day, it still confuses me greatly. Next story. When I was in high school, we lived in a mountain town outside of Denver, and it was a fairly long and dark road to get home. I had a Jeep Wrangler when I was 16, 17 years old and used to drive with the top down at pretty much all times during the summer. One night, I was driving home rather late, between 1 and 2 in the morning. cruising up the canyon with my top down, listening to some music, just going along. It was a very dark road, being that it was a mountain canyon. A two-lane road with a sheer cliff on one side and a river on the other. Multiple people have been killed in the canyon over the years, whether they take a corner too wide or just go off into the river. They've also gotten hit on their motorcycles, stuff like that. That night, I was heading home and suddenly my headlights just went out. It turned off entirely in the middle of the curvy canyon road. I immediately felt like there was someone in the back seat of my Jeep. I just knew that if I turned around, there was going to be a person sitting in the middle of the bench, staring directly at me. I knew something was in my open-top Jeep with me in the middle of the night, and I knew it wasn't a benevolent being. I got cold, tried to focus, felt my hair stand up on the back of my neck, and sheer panic built inside of me. I have never felt anything like it. Every alarm in my body was screaming, an entirely new feeling, and I have seen some sketchy things in my travels. But this was just different. Nothing felt right. Everything felt wrong. My entire being was disturbed. As quickly as I had turned off, my headlights turned back on. I turned around and of course there was no one there. But I spent the rest of the ride home absolutely terrified, wondering if there was someone or something in my car. I don't believe in the supernatural, and I have never felt anything like that before or since. But that night I was convinced there was something in my car. My parents moved out of that house while I was away in college, but every time I would drive that road for those couple of years, I was mortified. Next story. I served on submarines in the Navy from '96 to my medical discharge in August of 2004. I was on 3 different boats: SSN 709 Hyman G. Rickover, SSN 765 Montpelier, and on the SSBN 737 Kentucky Blue. This tale occurs on my first boat. I was on duty this day. I think it was either October or November. Finally got relieved. That's at midnight, military time for those of you in the gutter. I had the mid-watch, which makes for a long day. Morning muster to final muster, and all the divisional work in between. Dinner, training, possible drills, and field day. That doesn't leave much time for sleep before you go on watch at 2100, and doesn't leave much after for 0500 revelry. And the next day. Makes you feel like you won the lottery. It was also that time of year that the temperature starts to drop, that compounded by the cold air coming off of Chesapeake Bay. But you only have to deal with that for 4 hours. Despite the fact that one positive on this watch for a smoker was better opportunity to sneak one in, the first thing I usually did before I hit my rack was grab a smoke below decks. And that's what I did. At the time I was in one of the places the smoking lamp was lit up in the auxiliary machinery room up forward. So after grabbing a glass or two of bug juice on cruise mess, I headed down to grab a smoke and plan my next day. I got down to the diesel booth, sparked one up and whipped out my little green pad and a pen I always had to carry on me. I just started making my list when a senior chief I hadn't ever seen came clomping in with his big feet. Bald, mustached, tall and lanky. He walked in like he owned the place. The submarine community is rather small. So small that the only communities that are smaller in the military are special forces. It's a matter of pride for us that earned our fish. You may not know another active duty submariner by name, but you knew them by face at least. I didn't recognize this guy at all. I reasoned he just might be the squadron duty chief, as it was that time they do show up. But we were at the end of the pier, and we would usually be the last boat he would visit. That, and the squadron duty chief usually had a big red badge on his right shirt pocket. He was early and didn't have his tag. I was a bit suspicious, but we are meticulous as to who we let below decks. But I kept an eye on him. He cruised past the CO2 scrubbers and stopped at the O2 generator. It was used to create O2 from hydrolysis like the space shuttle. Only the one on the space shuttle was much better. Basically a potential bomb since H2 can go boom. I could clearly hear the tap of his pen he had pulled out of his pocket. He then stopped at this prehistoric beast of an ancient Fairbanks Morse diesel generator set. This thing combined was larger than your average car. I guess back in the 20s the Navy got a good deal on them and bought an assload of them in spare parts, and we were still using them at that time in the 90s. At this point, my cherry burns down to my fingers. This is completely strange. I pulled another cowboy killer out of my pack, sparked it up, and continued to observe. While I'm smoking this second nail in my coffin, he moves from the diesel generator to the trim pump. At this point, he gets really intimate, I guess. He's poking and prodding and spends a lot of time there at the base of the pump motor. This thing is capable of moving an insane amount of water and has to keep a lot of weight level. Eventually he gets up, walks back to the scrubbers, and I never see him again. I finished my cigarette, crushed it out, and looked for the guy. Nothing. There are only two ways in and out of this space, one of which is the door I could reach from the diesel booth, the other being the escape scuttle. I can see he walked past from the diesel booth. There was nobody. I was alone. It's like he wasn't there, but he was as real as you or me. Then nothing. I brought it up in the morning the next day at the duty section muster. Turns out everyone knew about him. Guess if you got lazy, he would let you know. Anyway, calmed my nerves to hear of everyone else having their experiences. Fast forward a couple of years. Got kicked off the Rickover after taking 6-on-1 trying to help a shipmate. I had a shipmate on the Montpelier that knew a plank owner of the 709. Him being part of the first crew, he introduced the both of us and I relayed my story to him. He said he'd be back in a bit and return with a cruise book, basically a naval yearbook that they used to do for deployments. He had me go through it and see if I saw someone familiar, and sure enough, the first chief of the boat, bald-headed, lanky, even the height and the mustache, it was him. I was informed that he was a torpedo man that liked to hang around the lower levels in the torpedo room and AMR while he was alive, and that is where he resided after death. I loved being a sonar tech, and I liked being a submariner. I mean, seriously, I belong in a group that is only exceeded by special forces and astronauts, in that order. Maybe if you lump all special forces together, but I wouldn't spend my afterlife on board a submarine, as proud as I was. Next story. Alright. I feel physically ill just remembering this scenario I found myself in. We were trying to buy our first house. We got pre-qualified, but there weren't a lot of houses out there that fit our budget and our loan requirements. That means we were looking at a lot of weird old houses. Honestly, some of them were really horrible. We regret not buying the one that was showing signs of sliding off its foundation because it turned out to be the best of the lot. One stank so bad of sewage when the realtor opened the front door that the realtor turned to us and said, "We're done looking at this one, aren't we?" We were. Another advertises a fixer-upper proved to be only half a house. The other half was gone in a landslide. Very artful photography. I'm part of the listing agent on that one. We had no idea until we saw it in person from our viewing. Didn't even have to go inside to view the inside. So we were a little cynical by the time our realtor called us and announced he'd found the perfect house. My partner viewed the listing though and said, "I think this could be the one." We headed out immediately to view it. My partner's mom was with us at the time, so she came along. She and I actually got along really well, so I valued her opinion and was happy she would be with us. The house seemed too good to be true. It was an old farmhouse, but in great shape. No failing septic fields or porches held up with truck jacks, not even peeling paint or rusty hinges. It was incredibly roomy, with high ceilings. Some nice details like chandeliers and a new stainless steel refrigerator. There was a large shop for my partner to tinker on his Jeep, and several extra bedrooms for me to pick for my studio. We couldn't believe such a nice place was listed at such a low price. There must be something wrong with it, right? Like right there, we should have recognized the plot to every haunted house story ever. So we stepped through the front door, and my partner and the realtor head off to go look at something or the other. And Mom, who's standing next to me, says, "Wow, what do you think?" And I said, "I don't like it." She looked at me kind of funny because she knows I'm the kick the tires and crawl under the hood before I make a decision type of person. She said, "Well, let's look around a little anyway." And I nodded, and we both went off to check the house out. Now, I do not know why I said that. She caught me off guard with a question, and I answered with the first thing that entered my mind. I kept going back over trying to remember my reasoning for saying I didn't like the house, and I just don't have any. I think she tapped into my lizard brain. Things took a sharp turn for the worse when I entered the kitchen. At first, I thought it was maybe a beeping sound, like one if the kitchen appliances is malfunctioning. The realtor had entered the kitchen behind me, and I said to him, "What's that noise?" And he just kind of shook his head at me, and I figured, being an older fellow, that maybe his hearing wasn't that good. But in less than a minute, the noise turned into a constant kind of ringing noise. It didn't stop even when I went outside the house and walked around the property. In fact, I noticed that it never changed no matter where I went. Normally, a constant sound will recede or grow louder as you move near or further away from its source. But this ringing noise was just everywhere. It didn't stop until we left and we were about a block away. Later, when I told my partner and his mom about it, neither of them had heard any noise. My partner, though, had said there had been a really strong, sickly sweet smell throughout the house. This was doubly weird because his poor sense of smell is kind of a family joke. He smoked for years and it seemed to have just destroyed his sense of smell. It's just not possible for him to smell something, especially a really strong odor, and no one else had been able to smell it. As we drove away comparing notes, I said another red flag for me was when they both started to argue with me about the microwave. The microwave was one of those ones that combined with a vent and positioned over the stovetop. It was unusually low though. I tried reaching the stove knobs, which were on the back of the stove, and found that I couldn't do it without contorting weirdly because the low microwave was actually in the way. I said aloud, "I wonder if we can move that." And they both started arguing against it. My partner said, "That's a feature a lot of people actually want because it's so convenient. We're lucky it's already been installed there." "I wouldn't want to change it," his mom said. "I had to adjust a little to it. But now I love my microwave above the stove in my own kitchen. You'll love it too." My partner said, "Yeah, I really love that in some mom's kitchen." That's when I knew something was really wrong with that house. Later, as we discussed it in the car, I told them that I knew something was wrong because neither of them had ever argued with me like that before. I know it's strange, but in all our years together, my partner and I have never argued about anything. We always rationally talk things out and can agree to compromise based on a list of positives or negatives. His mom is the same. It's because my partner's former stepfather was very abusive to both of them, and I'm a domestic violence survivor myself, who now works as a social worker. Like, arguing is completely against the nature of all three of us. But when I brought it up later in the car, they both started arguing about that microwave again like a recording on a loop, and I've had enough. His mom said again, "I really love my microwave above my stove." And I said, "Enough, Rita. In your kitchen, the microwave is by the fridge, and your range is set in the middle of the island. Your microwave is not anywhere near your stove." Dead silence. The kind of silence that you get when people realize an evil house just rewrote their thoughts. It got worse. Driving away from the house, reviewing what had just happened, my partner said, "I knew something was wrong, by the look on your face. I've never seen that look on your face before. And then you just walked out and sat in the yard. I just suddenly knew something was really wrong. That's why I told the realtor we were done and didn't want the house. I felt really bad. It's such a nice house. The realtor must think I'm crazy. It's okay. If either one of us doesn't like a house, then it's not the one. Besides, that smell, I don't think I could last long there if we couldn't get rid of that smell. I still don't know about any smell. I really didn't smell anything like that. I tried though. I really tried to keep looking at the house and see if I could just sort of get used to it. The ringing and everything, it's such a nice house. Probably the best one we'll find, but then, sort of, I started to cry, remembering what had happened, and then, honey, what happened? Big, ugly crying. I'd been so scared and was now so relieved to be away from that house. And then scared again, just now when we were looking at the house, how I'd run the water, then feel the pipes for leaks. Yeah, well, when you guys left the kitchen, I stayed to do that. But there was a bunch of junk under the sink. Old paper bags and bottles and stuff. And then that stupid garbage disposal. So the pipes ran off to the side deep in the cabinets. It was really dark and I couldn't see, so I just had to sort of reach my arm way back there and through all that junk. And then I thought, I don't know, I was trying to make sense of it. I thought maybe I'd caught my watch band on something, or maybe I'd somehow gotten my arm sort of tangled in that mess of pipes. I don't know. My brain couldn't make sense of it, so I was holding real still because, I guess I didn't want to jerk my arm out too fast and break my watch if it was the band that was stuck, or bang up my arm if I was somehow caught in the pipes. You gotta extract yourself carefully when you get stuck or snagged, right? So I was holding really still at that moment, thinking about how I was going to navigate out of there. And that's why I so clearly felt the sensation that whatever or something had grabbed my wrist slowly let go. The hand, if that's what it was, felt sort of dry and raggedy, maybe a little leathery. And as it loosened its grip on my wrist, it slid off upwards and back. That's why I know I wasn't just some type of bag handle or something I'd snagged falling off, because I was holding perfectly still and it slid off upwards. Oh yeah, I nearly died of a heart attack right there alone on the kitchen floor of a haunted house. Triple, quadruple, massive heart failure. I got right out of there, shot up and back, left the cabinet door hanging open, and got right out of that house. I left the building rapidly. We're not going back. We're never ever going to drive past it again. I felt bad for whoever buys that house. Listen, kids, too good to be true means just like that. I can take flitting shadows and lights turning on and stuff like that, but I draw the line at things that grab me in the dark. Nope. On a side note, I told my coworker about this. Next day, she told me that reminded her about the time when she was younger and had gone on a date and they'd gone to see Amityville Horror in the theater. She said that at that point in the movie, when that horrible face appears at a window and a demonic voice says, "Leave this house now," that's what I'd done. I knew that it was time to leave that house right then and there. Next story. First of all, I have to preface this story with the fact that the house I grew up in had a spirit in it. It mainly stayed on the third floor converted attic bedrooms and the staircase that led up to it. Of course, my room was up there. When my parents first moved in years prior, it had been empty for a couple of years. My older siblings used to talk about all the religious medals they would find that were left behind. Things would happen like knocks behind the walls that would stop if you got fed up enough to yell, "Stop!" Doors opening and closing, etc. But the thing that stuck with me was the feeling of when it was around. I could be doing something and be really focused on it, and then boom, that feeling, like someone standing right behind you, boring their eyes into the back of your head, like you were invading someone else's space. It used to make me literally freeze up with fear until I could muster the courage to bolt down the stairs. Even though I knew there was something there, I used to try to convince myself that it was all in my head. Well, when I got older and moved into a different house that was basically isolated in the woods and realized I had no fear there, I knew that it wasn't me being a scaredy cat. It had been that house. Fast forward a few years. I'm married and we're looking for a house. We looked at many. One particular house seemed good, but as soon as we got in the yard, something seemed a little off. Walking around, I parted with the realtor and went up to the bedrooms. I was up there a few minutes before suddenly feeling that feeling. It had been a number of years since experiencing that sensation, but I instantly knew I wasn't alone. I turned around and went right back downstairs. We ended the walkthrough, thanked the realtor, and left. My husband asked me what I thought. I said, absolutely not. Something or someone is still living in that house. It's haunted. He hadn't felt anything, but wasn't going to push it if I hated it. We kept looking and eventually found a nice house that didn't come with a resident spirit. There was no way I was going to live in that fear again. And just the other day, my husband and I were driving by that one house in my neighborhood that hasn't sold despite high demand. It's been vacant for more than 2 years, even after a renovation. Just as we were about to go by, I say out loud, I wonder what's wrong with that. And as the words were leaving my mouth, I see a lady walking towards the front door, holding what appeared to be burning sage. Well, that answered that question.